Hey guys, in this video we will begin to implement our JQuery Autocomplete function to aid us with enrolling students in a course. But before we get into all of that, I want to go through quickly some adjustments that I have made to the application since the last video, and you can feel free to emulate these if you wish. Firstly, I removed the contact and about links from our navbar, so now we only have home, courses, students, and enrollments. All right, and we could actually just add lecturers here, considering that we added a module to manage lecturers. So I'll just put that in quickly. So our navbar now only has links to our modules that we have implemented or are implementing. Secondly, you would notice that I have a styles.render, and this is rendering some styles for jQuery UI. So I added a new bundle to my bundle config for jQuery UI, and I'm including the base all.css, which includes the base.css and the themes.css files, as well as, and I had date picker, I was running an experiment, but this should really be autocomplete.css. So I am adding these two files to my overall CSS imports, and I am referencing them in the jQuery UI styles render. All right, and if the need arises to have more, then we can just put them in as we know we need to. Once again, order matters, so you'd want to make sure you include all of the base files first before the individual CSS files. All right, so now before we get into our jQuery excitement, I want us to just run back over to our documentation here given to us by jQueryUI.com and just take a look at the autocomplete feature. What we're aiming for is when we type a student's name here and select it, and in this example it is made with programming languages. So let's say the programming languages would be our student names, and I type something like HAS, then the expectation is that any student whose name contains HAS should come up in this drop down. So if I type C, then you'll get a better picture. And then when I select that, it will be that student that will be enrolled once I click create. So we're doing it in pieces. Right now, we're just dealing with implementing the autocomplete. In the next video, then we will deal with actually effecting that adding and enrollment functionality. Back in Visual Studio, we start this exercise by first finding the create view for our enrollments. And then we're going to do a bit of refactoring, rearranging of our fields. And just by way of recap, we have a field for grade. We have a field for course ID, which gave us a drop-down list with all of the courses in there. We have a field for student, which gave us a drop-down list for students, and another one for lecturers, once again with a drop-down. And in case you've forgotten and you're wondering why we have so many drop-down lists, once there's a one-to-many relationship, meaning with enrollments, it's literally many to one with all of these. So many students can be in the enrollments table, many courses can be in the enrollments tables, and many lecturers. You'll find that .NET in scaffolding will actually give you drop-down lists auto-generated, giving you all of your possible options. And all that really gets passed by is the course ID, since that is what the enrollments table is really storing anyway. So we want drop-down lists for some of these, and for some of these fields, we want to change them up a bit. At the time of enrollment, then we probably don't need grade. So actually the grade, and remember in the database that we would have allowed null for grade. So at the time of creating an enrollment, that is adding a class, saying who is the lecturer, and adding the student, we really don't need the grade. So I can remove this. As at the time of creation of an enrollment, we probably don't know who the lecturer is, so we don't need the lecturer ID right now. All that is really important is to specify which class we're dealing with and which student or students will be assigned to this class. Now, part of this activity will be to make this entire procedure dynamic enough that you don't have to, the user won't have to browse away and browse back every time they want to add a student. They can just select a course and add, and a part of the page will refresh. But we're not there yet. Right now, we're just dealing with the autocomplete. Now I'm going to reference the jQuery documentation once again, just so we have an appreciation for the code that we're about to write. And the part of the autocomplete documentation that I want to focus on is a remote JSON-P data service. All right. So we're going to be using jQuery Ajax, and you see they make reference to it, jQuery Ajax, which will actually call a link or call a JSON endpoint that we are going to make right now that will serve up some list from the database, in this case, a list of students based on what is being typed. So the example here is that they have a database of birds and they have a URL for the search, and they're specifying the data type and what should be searched for. So that's what data represents, the term to be searched for. And then upon a successful query, and it will return the data and they will show the data. All right. And then when one is selected, so that is actually just an event in this entire process. So the source of the data will be our Ajax call. They're saying the minimum length for any search query should be 2. So 2 characters, and then you trigger the search. And then once it is selected, then they wish to write to the log that you selected this with that value and that ID. Now let us begin our journey. So I'm going to type this script thing as the third part of my page. I'm just putting it at the top here of the view so that we can have a distinct section for it. You may probably later on extract this and put in a script file and reference it directly. That's fine. But for now, I'm just going to write it right here. And because I'm using jQuery, sometimes you would start off jQuery as document.ready. You can actually just say $function and then you open close. I like to just close my functions at the same time. We're just getting warmed up here, but before we even start writing jQuery, we have to make sure that we have the appropriate controls for what we're about to do. Now, remember that we want to be able to type the student's name, and we have a drop-down list working with. So we can't type the student's name with a drop-down list. And there's another factor to this, that the drop-down list is actually tracking the student's ID. A text box won't be tracking the student's ID, it will be tracking the name of the student. So in order to facilitate the need for the user to see the name in a text box and the actual solution to get an ID upon the submission of the form, we have to take this out. So I'm just going to erase this, and I'm going to replace it with 2 controls, a text box and a hidden field. All right, so I did that real quickly, and I'll just walk you through the 2 lines of code, which really shouldn't be that foreign. We have our HTML helper here, and we're using an edit for. You could have used a text box for, that's fine. Then you'd realize that the anatomy of the edit for and the text box for are kind of different when it comes to referencing our CSS classes, but either way, they both need model, and we're associating the text box with model.student.firstname. And the reason I'm using the first name is that we did not use the full name column in students. We used first name and last name. And I'm just going to use this because I just need a text box, because remember, the edit for is going to yield a control that is in keeping with whatever data type we're telling it that we need it for. So in this case, it's a text. We'll get a text box. I could have used last name if I used a view model, which would be an abstraction from the actual entity coming from the database. I could have included a full name data field in that and then used full name. So there are multiple ways to do this. I'm just keeping it simple so that you can get up and running. Later on in the course, I'll show you view models and how you can create that level of abstraction. But for now, let's just stick to this. So we have model.student.firstname, and then we're just giving it some new HTML attributes and including the class form-control, which gives it that Bootstrap look. And then the second line is a hidden field, because we want to track the student ID when the student is selected from our autocomplete drop-down list. once again, this autocomplete text box is only going to show us the name, but what the application needs is the ID. So we're just using a hidden for so that the user doesn't have to see the 1, 2, 3 or the 2000 and whatever the student ID value is. So we're hiding that from the user. But then when the form is submitted, this is what the model really needs. This is what the controller needs to see. And we can just take a quick look on the post action for create that it's really just wanting student ID. It doesn't care about the first name and the last name. All right, so this is striking a balance between giving the user a visually acceptable interface and actually making sure that our solution doesn't break and maintaining the integrity of the data that we're passing across. All right, so we've modified this and we just took out the drop-down box and we added a text box, which is going to serve the purpose of having us facilitate our autocomplete functionality, and a hidden for, which is just tracking the ID of the student that is selected from this autocomplete text box. Now, back in jQuery, we can actually just go to the documentation and probably copy and paste some of this code and change it as we go along. So I'm just going to quickly grab some of this and I'm just going to adjust it as I go along. All right, so here we have our code and we're going to start refactoring to our purposes. The first change is the target elements. Now in jQuery, you can target any element using the name, the ID value, just like in CSS. When in CSS you want the element by ID, use the hashtag, or if you want it by a class, use a dot. So in this situation, you can actually reference it directly by the ID using the hashtag or directly by the class name using the dot. In this case, what we want to target is the edit for, and then we have student dot first name. So in other words, whatever the model value is here, that determines the ID of the element. So the ID of this drop-down list is, well, in this case, course ID. The ID for edit for is student, not dot, but underscore. When you have that entity and its property, then it's usually a underscore. So that's a little gray area, but I'll go into debug mode and show you how you can determine what that ID will be. In this case, the hidden for, its ID is student ID. So I'm just going to quickly go into debug mode and show you the IDs as they are rendered. All right, so this is what our creation page looks like right now, having stripped out the other drop-down boxes, and we have course ID as the label, which we know we can change using our method classes, and we have student ID, and what we wanted to determine was the ID for this element, which is a text box. So I can just go there and inspect element, and then by looking at whatever is rendered here, I can see that the ID for the element is student. The model is student dot first name. So in code, it would be student dot first name, but a dot is an illegal element in an ID in HTML. So what is rendered is actually student underscore first name. So we can just come out of debug mode quickly, or we can stay in debug mode since what we're about to do is only going to modify the interface. So we can just change this target element to student underscore first name. And then we see that we're following the code dot autocomplete, which is calling the function autocomplete on that target element. Now, the next step is to change the URL that is being referenced. We're going to have our own URL, and you have two ways to write this. You can write it using the HTML helper, or you can just write it using the same pattern of slash and endpoint. So I'm going to use the slash and endpoint method, where I'm going to say slash, and I want it in the enrollments. That's the controller. Right, so it would be enrollments slash what is the action name, and I'll call it get students. So we need to go into our controller, elements controller, and later on make an action that will get called whenever this function is invoked. All right, and the data type, we can just modify this to JSON. All right, JSON-P is a specialized format, so JSON. So I feel more comfortable using JSON. you can test it with either and let me know how it works. And then for data, you need to specify what the name of the variable that is going to contain whatever data is being entered into this element. That's the name. So that means when we build our JSON endpoint, we have to make sure that it is outfitted and prepared to take some variable called term, and the value that we're passing is request.term. So this could really be anything. This could be term, this could be query, whatever you want to call it. Just make sure that when we're implementing this action, we have a facility to recognize that this is a parameter being passed in. So we will get to that point soon. I'm just building out this jQuery code line by line. The next function is success, and success basically gets invoked when the source successfully brought back data, and so success contains said data. And what I'm going to do here is add a quick debug line. So in jQuery, you don't really get a debugging tool like Visual Studio to take it line by line. So what is a good technique is to just use console.log, and then you can just put whatever value it is that you want to write to the console, and this console would be the browser console. So whatever browser you're using, in this case Chrome, you always have a console tab here. And you see that we have an error here, and I'll explain this error. But when we do console.log, whatever value it is that we want to see printed here, you can just see it there. And that is how we go ahead and debug and make sure that the values that we expect are the values that we're getting back. We can leave the minimum length, that property, so it means that it won't invoke the autocomplete until minimum 2 characters have gone into the search box or the element, which in this case is student_first name. And select will say, what do you want me to do when a value has been selected? This takes 2 parameters, event, which says what was the event that was triggered, and UI, or say query or data, whatever it is, and that is whatever value is being returned upon the success, or whatever value is being selected. So I'm just going to put a console.log here once again, just so that we can make sure that we're getting back some sensible data. Now I'm going to come out of debug mode quickly, and I'll explain that error. Let me just bring it up quickly. So this error is basically saying that you're trying to initialize something when there's a referencing problem. And I would have said it more than once, and if we click that, we'll see that the referencing problem is right here. Oh, sorry, we didn't refresh. All right, so it's saying that the referencing problem is right there at our function invocation, and that is because, and I'll bring up the full page source so we can see it, that is because our script here is running in isolation. This is a jQuery block of code, jQuery and Ajax, and we are running it at the top of the page when we are referencing jQuery at the end of the page. And remember that I said sequence matters. So what needs to happen is that these scripts need to be referenced above this block, and so everything will work properly. So I'm going to come out of debug mode, go to my layout, and I'm just going to move these. So you have, as I said, you have a number of techniques to handle this. You'll see a number of ways. So I'm just going to move all my script files to the top of the page. All right, underneath Modernizer. All right, so I have all of my styles and all of my scripts rendering first, and then by the time everything would have been rendered and it gets to the body or the view, remember the view gets rendered there, and in this case this is the view, then this script would have already been taken care of in terms of what prerequisite libraries it needs to reference in order to do the autocomplete and the jQuery functions. Now that I've done the JavaScript portion, I'm going to modify my controller and add the action, and I'll just add it below the delete confirmed, and we're going to type this out quickly. So firstly, I did specify that I wanted the type of call to be post. Did I? I did not, so I'm going to modify that. We want it to be a post call, so we'll just say type, and we'll write in quotation marks post. So our URL should be called in post. And then in my controller, I'm going to modify the code and add an HTTP post JSON result function. So up until now, we would have seen action result each time. Now we need JSON result. We have a public and it's JSON, and you see that IntelliSense is helping you along. So they give us a built-in function that can return JSON results, and I did say that the function should be called getStudents. So I'm just making sure that the spelling is correct. And then what we are passing in is a parameter called, what did we call it? Term. So we're getting a parameter string term. And then this function, we're going to declare a variable called students. And what we're going to do is just run a quick query. So by now we should know how queries work, because we've been scaffolding, we've been modifying code. And so we just want to run a quick query. So I'm just going to say db dot, and what table are we querying? Students. And then use our dot operator again. And then we're going to go into some of the dynamic nature of link and entity framework. And so we're going to declare an abstract object with the data values that we really need for this operation. Once again, the two data values that we know we need are the actual name, which should populate this text box, and the ID, whose value we want to place in this element. We know, however, that we can only look at one element at a time when it relates to the name, either the first name or the last name, and the ID, well, it's there. So what we need are name and ID. And to be very complete in our search, we want to make sure that when we type any two letters, that combination of letters needs to be in either the first name or the last name, not just the first name. So even though we're using first name here, we don't want to limit our autocomplete to just first name. So once again, this is just because we didn't use a view model, and I'm not looking at full name in the ability to specify what the text box should be. I'm just using student.firstname. And if you still don't feel comfortable with that, you could actually just use a regular input field, type equals text to get a text box. And then you could say the ID is equal to student name, and you give it the Bootstrap class, of course, and then you could just use that here, right? So I'm just showing you that the name of the ID is immaterial to the operation that we're really about to perform. So I'll just leave this bit of code here as a reference point if you wish, but I'll continue with this since we spent so much time ventilating that. So db.students.select, which then requires me to put in some parameters, and I have to specify a lambda expression first. So Q, here is where I can actually declare a brand new object that doesn't necessarily look like a student's object. So I'm going to say new because I want a new and abstract object with my own values. So Q is pointing to a new object, and I am going to fill this abstract object with a name. And for name, I'm going to say Q dot, and then remember the Q gives me access to all of the properties of whatever table we're looking at. So I have Q dot first name, and I'm going to make it look like a full name. So I'm going to concatenate first name and last name and say Q dot and the last name. And of course, we put a little space there so it looks user-friendly. So that is the full name of the student. And then we also want an ID. So once again, this abstract object allows me to declare whatever properties I want on the fly, and then it will construct these objects and put the list of them in this student's variable. All right, so ID will be equal to Q dot ID, student ID rather. And right there we would have said, once again, from our database and our students table, select into a brand new object. That's pretty much what that is saying. Select these properties into a brand new object, and this brand new object has the property name, and give me these values, and it has an ID, give me those values. And we could go ahead and just put as many other properties as we wish, but once again, we really only need the name and the ID, so those are the only two that I'm selecting. But it's not finished there, because remember that we want to filter. So this is selecting all of the students into brand new objects with name and ID. That's fine, but the fact is we need to filter on term. We need to make sure that whatever is being returned as students has term in there. So we're going to add where, and we can use Q, and the filter command would be Q dot, and then you'll notice that the Q is now only picking up ID and name because it's only trying to filter on whatever new object I just selected all this data into. All right, so then I want to see where name, which is a combination of first name and last name, contains, and our expression is term. So I'm going to walk through all of this one more time. We're running a query. We're storing the results in a variable called students. And this query is looking into the students table, and it is selecting all of the records, but it's reconstructing them into an on-the-fly, very abstract model that we just created. We didn't even give it a name. We just created it just for this purpose. And I'm saying I want the name, which will be q.firstname plus and a empty space and last name, just so it looks user-friendly. That's a full name. So I could have called this full name if I wanted to. It's really up to you. I'll just leave mine as name. And then we select the ID, and we say the ID should have the student's ID. And then we're going to filter all of that. So all of this will be filtered where the name that is returned contains this term. And then at the end of all of that, we need to return, because you notice that this red line has been here all this time. We have a JSON result, so that the return is going to be a bit different. So we're going to say return JSON, and we want to return our variable students, and we just pass in one of those methods that we need to pass in. All right, so we're returning a JSON result of this object, or a set of these objects as JSON objects, and we just add in that behavior to allow get. We can build and just ensure that we have no errors. All right, so here in our browser, we'll just test and see if all is going well with our function calls. We can quickly look and see the students that we have in our database. All right, so I added a few more. So back in create, remember that our code right now, it's just monitoring via console.log what is happening with each step. So when source is successful, then it should write the data that it's bringing back to the console, and also if something is selected. But right now, I think we'll only be able to see what comes back to the console.log. So if I type T, you notice nothing is happening because it's not minimum length. So if I type TE, and then you see the minimum length, and you see that there's some action happening. But if we drill down into the console, we see that it's actually bringing back some data for us. If I try TA, it brings back data again. And you see that it's really just filtering based on that search. So we're bringing back the name, and we're bringing back the ID, like we specified in our abstract object, that we really only need name and ID. Now what we need to do is actually display the actual drop down so that we can click and select that value here, but in the background, store this ID value in our hidden field. All right, so back in our application, I made a change here quickly, and I'll just walk you through it. The whole point of source having two parameters, request and response, we name them that, but we really name them according to what they're for. The request is what will be passed, and the response is what is received. So what is received comes back with success, and using our response function, we can actually map some data items, which would have been what is returned. So data is an array of the search results. So the response, I'm mapping all of those data items, and I'm passing each record from this array into this function, and I'm returning a label value of item.name. So remember that item or data would have an array of objects that have ID and name. So each item here is going to have a name and an ID. So what I'm doing is returning objects with label and value and an ID. Label and value are especially important for what is displayed on the screen when the names come up and the actual drop down appears. The label is what appears in the drop down, and when you click and the text fills the text box, then that would be the value. So you wouldn't want to change these from name, since the name is what is expected to be seen in both situations. However, ID, once again, is just for background purposes. So go back to our interface, and I'll bring up the console so that we can see what's happening. And then I'm going to start typing. So remember, nothing until 2 characters. So I'll say Trev. And then there you see it appearing. If I type Will, right? So it's actually searching the full name for any character sequence. And you see that for each successful result, we're getting back that data object. All right, so I'm going to actually select one. And remember that we have a console.log tracking when we select, and that was it being fired there. And we see here that we have the item object with the label, which would have been what is displayed when it's dropped down, the value, which you notice is going into the text box, and the ID. So now we need to write some code to make sure that our hidden field gets populated with that ID, because if we look at it specifically, there's nothing changing. We have the hidden field and there is no value, all right, which is not what we want. So we want that when we select that name, the value of this hidden field gets updated. So back in Visual Studio, we will modify our select function to then update the element in question, and the element in question is student ID. So I'll leave the console.log query, and what I'll do is say $, open quotation, open brackets and quotation marks, student ID. And jQuery makes it easy for us to set the value, so we can just call the val function, and we'll just pass in the value that we want it to be set at. So we can say data dot, we named it query, so we'll say query dot, and then remember that this is actually being mapped to an object with item, and item has name and ID. So we need query dot item dot, and I'm going to specify ID with common case, since that's how it's written here. So it's label, value, and ID. So I'm setting the value of our hidden field, student ID, to that ID. And remember that that is happening whenever a select event is fired. So I'm just going to quickly go back, refresh, and we'll try that again. And just watch the value for the hidden field. And there you go, you see it's being updated. So if I say test, and we have these two, it's being updated each time. So now we know that we're actually tracking the value of the student that is being selected. Now, once again, our objective is that we will have this page and a create button. And when we click create, we see a dynamic refresh and reload of the list of students currently associated with this course. So for now, I'm just going to select one from the drop-down box, and I'm going to enroll test student into this, and I'm going to click create, and then we see what happens. Okay, sorry, I had a breakpoint on that bit of code, but if we go here and look at the object, you see that we're passing in the essentials, of course, ID, null, but then we did allow null for lecturer ID and for grade, and student is getting it. So the two most important parts of this particular model are getting data. So if we press F5 and continue, then we will be rerouted to the enrollments index page. Now, once again, we are going to be doing some modifications to that whole process, so it doesn't go back here every time and then we have to create new. We will actually have a partial view of the list of students enrolled, refreshing each time create, or each time this is changed, it will refresh to show exactly who is enrolled in the selected class. And once a student is entered here and selected, it will refresh and add them dynamically without moving away from this page.